Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to ISoNTech 2023. Firstly, I must say thank you to Jessica and Paddy for having me back. I did this in 2019, the year before the pandemic. I really enjoyed it. I hope I was all right, but I really enjoyed it because the technology absolutely fascinates me. And so thank you, Jessica and Paddy, for having me back. Why does the technology interest me? Well, I actually think this is all about technology. This is the core of what this is all about and why we're all here. Ever since Honleck invented the e-cigarette, applying vaporizing technology to an electronic or digital cigarette, we've basically seen innovation pretty relentlessly in a steady stream. This has fueled a number of things. It's fueled a huge drop in cigarette sales. Forgive me, I'll just use the UK as an example, but cigarette sales last year in the UK were over half of what they were 10 years ago. That's a stellar story, I would have said. In the UK, the number of smokers, I looked at the latest ONS data, last year 12.7% of the adult population, sorry, that's actually 2021 rather than last year. That compares to 20.3% in 2010. And I've asked Nazan from Philip Morris, I think it would be good to hear some of the comparable data for Japan, where there's been similarly success stories. We've seen the birth of a huge new industry. Barnaby Page from eSig Intelligence has helped me on this, but they reckon it's worth over $58 billion in the last year. By anybody's standards, that's a huge number. We've seen some of the world's largest cigarette companies declaring intentions to stop selling cigarettes. We've seen, visions for a smoke-free world, a world without cigarettes, and most importantly, as important is the emergence of tobacco harm reduction as a third plank of tobacco and smoking control policies after firstly prevention and then cessation. So I don't think any of us would be here if for the 10th GFN if the technology hadn't emerged. I'll be as quick as I can, but forgive me, indulge me if I just make two personal observations on in relation to the technology. Firstly, I'll just state the obvious. I was very pleased to hear this getting a name check in the presentation before lunch, but I don't think it's mentioned enough. This technology is hugely disruptive, and Goldman Sachs identified that in 2013, and they put it in their top 3 disruptors technologies. Tobacco sales around the world are worth $900 billion, and that doesn't, well, somebody might correct me on that, but $900 billion, that doesn't include China, so the number's stratospheric. And in addition to that, you've got the tobacco control industry, which is a huge industry of itself. So there's lots and lots of money involved. There's lots and lots of jobs involved. And there are a lot of very large stakeholders. The legacy, I hope they don't mind me calling them that, but the legacy cigarette companies are grappling with the greatest challenge they've ever faced. For many years, they've had a duopoly or an oligopoly in most of their major markets around the world. So hugely disruptive for them, for the pharmaceutical industry, who've hitherto had a monopoly of the NRT market, for the WHO, public health, tobacco control. We hear it talked about a lot, but large elements of which are wedded to the quit or die approach to life, or else wedded to the ideological war against big tobacco. For them, accepting tobacco harm reduction is a big change. It challenges their raison d'etre, it challenges their jobs, it challenges their funding. And of course, governments, it's hugely disruptive for revenue. somebody might shout out the number, but what percentage of that 900 billion ends up in the hands of governments? So these are very significant vested interests, and I think it's very important to be aware. A book that David Sweener pointed me towards a few years back, but Calestis Humour, Why People Resist New Technologies. It's called Innovation and Its Enemies. I would really heartily recommend it. It's a fantastic read, and it points out, it uses examples from coffee, mechanical refrigeration. It explains how people may choose to respond to disruption. And I think everybody who's involved in the THR advocacy movement should, have this pretty much front of mind in terms of understanding the history of disruptive technologies and what may or may not happen. I mean, everybody says they want progress, but not everybody wants change. The second point I would just, and I'd say, I promise you there's only 2 points. The second point I would make is that I would pose a question, actually, but do we spend enough time talking about the technology, the products, the wide range of them, how they've evolved, the industry, its makeup and diversity, and of course its disruptive nature? I just question whether it's talked about as much as it could be, should be. It's not properly understood, and I think it's an important point there. There are a huge number of sort of, I'll just use a few examples, but why has the industry grown so very, very rapidly? That 58 billion, Barnaby might correct me, but that's over what, 13 years or something? Well, the reason why it's grown so quickly is a huge number of smokers would want to stop or reduce. So the demand for these products, absolutely monumental. What exactly are the products? I just think for the e-cigarette, obviously it has absolutely no tobacco in it. It has a tobacco flavoring in the nicotine, which is exactly the same as in a pharmaceutically licensed NRT. What's the purpose of an e-cigarette? Well, I'd say it's exactly the same as an NRT product. And I think snus, heated tobacco, pouches, which I'm delighted we're going to hear a lot more about today, have the same intended purpose. I don't think these things are sort of aired and repeated ad nauseam enough. There are a huge number of products. Why? Why is that? I mean, I would say that the demand at the outset, at the beginning, was huge. The industry came from the entrepreneurial SMEs. They were all able to respond incredibly quickly to the rapid evolving consumer needs and demands. And there were limited barriers to entry. So very quickly we had cigalikes, and that's what I was involved in the early days. We had the cigalikes, but how quickly did we then go on to the pen products, the open systems, and then when the pod products emerged, it happened very, very quickly. Yes, we even had disposable products right back in those days, and how quickly they went out of fashion, which is a little bit ironic when you see what's happening at the moment. How is the industry made up? We never really talk about that. Yes, kick-started by Honlick and the entrepreneurial SMEs I've mentioned. The big multinational cigarette companies were already exploring heated tobacco, and they had been for a few years back, but they unquestionably expedited and escalated their investment in that, and heated tobacco products were launched shortly after. The cigarette companies began inquiring through a sort of acquisitions strategy rather than organic strategy. They started buying up the vaping businesses when they saw how popular they were becoming with their smokers. And on the subject of the traditional tobacco industry, I'd just make a thing only because I read it recently and I thought it was an excellent paper. I really would recommend David Levy's paper on do tobacco companies have an incentive to promote harm reduction products and the role of competition. And the regulators don't really understand this, I don't think, but competition is critical to keep this transformation and the competition there. Otherwise, what real incentives are there for the cigarette companies to go at the pace, or the traditional tobacco companies to go at the pace that we all would like to see? Why have some products proved particularly popular? I mean, I think Juul, only because I was involved a little bit before Juul came along, but the early products weren't good enough. They weren't capable of appealing. So a lot of smokers rejected them. They weren't strong enough. Juul had a higher nicotine content. It used nicotine salts. It proved hugely popular with smokers as a result of that. We don't really sort of talk about that. I think heated tobacco, yes, it's proved very popular in some markets where vaping's restricted or there's limited access to vaping products. But there's an awful lot of smokers who like a product which is close in taste and smell and sort of sensory to a cigarette. And I would just say on disposables, which is a bit of the sort of flavor of the month, and people have been talking about it the last couple of days, do we really talk about how disposables have come about? I would contend that they're actually a product of the regulations in the US. The US restricted non-tobacco flavored pod products. What did the sort of cute manufacturers think? I'll tell you what, and they proved hugely popular. And, you know, would it be fair to say that these products then started coming to Europe after the success they'd proved in the US? So my point is that none of the public dialogue, or very little of it, seems to spend much time on the technology, on the products and the industry, the whats, the whys, the hows. And how often, for example, does one read or hear about a heated tobacco product being referred to as an e-cigarette? How often does one hear of snus being referred to as nicotine pouches being referred to as snus? And it personally drives me up the wall when I'm on an airplane or at an underground station when they say no smoking of things on this station or plane, and this includes the smoking of e-cigarettes. I think much more time should be spent in trying to correct this lack of understanding amongst the public health, regulatory, wider public. Today, yesterday, and for the next 2 days, we're discussing nicotine and harm reduction. But for me, technology is at the very core of that discussion. But in terms of the public narrative, how little time seems to be devoted to talking about it and explaining it. So that would be my message. Ensure all stakeholders, and even more importantly, the wider public, truly understand the technology, the products, the industry, and so forth, and its disruptive potential that we all know can bring about the end of smoking. Let's not let confusion, misinformation, and obfuscation reign. So forgive me for sharing those as a couple of thoughts, but it may be a bit indulgent of me, but I do think those are two quite critical points that are overlooked. So enough of me, let's get on, and as I say, we've got a great cast. It's fantastic. We're going to hear a lot about nicotine pouches in my book, my preferred product of choice now, and so let's crack on. We do have a couple of changes to the agenda, but that's only because a couple of people have been held up either by COVID or visa issues. But anyway, I'll explain those as we go along.